To find out what happened to John O'Brien, Billy is meeting military historian Rana Chinna.
The uprising spread like wildfire. It was called the Devil's Wind. And the force of which John was a part were desperate to reach Kanpur because they were aware that massacres had been taking place.
Really?
Yeah.
In Kanpur, 350 British men had already been killed by the rebels. But 200 women and children were still being held captive. Their lives depended on John and the relief force arriving before they suffered the same fate. John's regiment marched over 100 miles, facing fierce resistance as they battled to reach Kanpur.
This was at the peak of summer, and they were all in their woolen red coats.
Of course they were.
John would have seen his comrades dying of heat exhaustion, heat stroke, dysentery, cholera.
Oh, my God.
The relieving force of which John was a part reached here just 2 days too late.
Well, just 2 days too late.
Yes. The women and children were killed. They were dragged out and thrown into the well. And this is that well.
Just 2 days before John and the relief force arrived, the women and children had been butchered, dismembered, and piled into the well.
Oh, my God. I'm just trying to imagine my old great-great-great-grandfather arriving here to see this well and this nightmarish scene.
Yes. If they looked into the well, they could actually see the remains.
But it would have a profound effect on them all, never mind John. And to be confronted with this when they arrived.
Yes.
Which would be done on purpose, of course. It's a great military manoeuvre to confront the approaching troops with something nightmarish.
There's another thing. If you notice the bats,
Yes.
the fruit bats,
Yeah.
you know what the locals believe? They believe the bats are here because this is a place of tortured souls.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's creepy. It's such a delightful place. It's hard to believe that such a horrible thing happened here.
We also have to remember that when John O'Brien got here, just days after that, he became a father for the second time. And Margaret, his first daughter, was 5 years old.
Yeah.
So to see these young children having been butchered,
It would mean a great deal to him.
would have had a great impact on him.
Mm.
Yeah. For John and his comrades, remember Kanpur became the rallying
Really?
cry for them. Yeah.
John's commanding officer, Colonel Neil, ordered immediate punishment of those suspected of taking part in the massacre.
Each miscreant, after sentence of death is pronounced upon him, will be taken down to the house in question under a guard and will be forced into cleaning up a small portion of the bloodstains. The task will be made as revolting to his feelings as possible. After properly cleaning up his portion, the culprit is to be immediately hanged, and for this purpose a gallows will be erected to close at hand. Oh my God.
The suspects were forced to clean up the victims' blood with their tongues. As further humiliation, and in violation of their religious beliefs, Muslims were forced to eat pork and Hindus to eat beef before being hanged.
He was not concerned whether they were guilty or innocent. It didn't matter to him.
So here John would be part of this,
Yes, very much.
enforcing this.
Yes.
Oh dear.
John O'Brien would have been a part of that, yeah. One of the officers said, every day the trees are ripe with the fruits of rebellion. And he was talking about the corpses that were strung up. Yeah.
My God, Neil, guy's a sadist, isn't he?
He was very brutal.
I don't know what to think about that.
Yeah.
We didn't get this history at school.
No.
Well, the way I see it, my great-great-great-grandfather was a very nice man who was lorded over by Mr. Neil. He probably just was a private doing what he was told.
Private soldiers have to do exactly what they were told to do.
With the horrors of Kanpur fresh in their minds, John and the relief force were ordered to march 50 miles to Lucknow, where a massacre on an even greater scale was threatened. 2,000 British soldiers and civilians had sought refuge in the British headquarters called the Residency. Surrounded by rebels and under constant attack, they were desperate to be rescued. With thousands of civilians now supporting the rebel soldiers, the relief force suffered heavy losses in the battle to break through enemy lines and reach the Residency.
This was the main gate, and this was the gate that John would have come through.
Yes, and of course he would have fought his way to here.
They were fighting every inch of the way.
God, it's remarkable to think I'm walking up the same road as my great-great-great-grandfather walked up.
When John and his relief force finally arrived in late September, the siege of Lucknow had been raging for 3 months.
This was a proper battleground.
Yeah, you can see where that one's been hit with heavy artillery just up at the top there.
That's right, 24 hours a day under fire.
Yes.
There is a contemporary print.
Oh, yes. That's great. Just trying to imagine the cheering.
Yes. There's an account.
The Lady's Diary of the Siege of Lucknow.
Yeah. The extract.
Yesterday evening, on the 88th day of the siege, our long looked for and so often despaired of relief arrived. Never shall I forget the moment to the latest day I live. The big, rough-bearded soldiers were seizing little children out of our arms, kissing them with tears rolling down their cheeks, and thanking God they had come in time to save them from the fate of those at Kanpur. God, that must have been a party. Well, that's wonderful. So did any fighting continue in here?
Yes, you see, you have to remember the numbers were so few and they were surrounded by a force of 8,000 to 10,000 men.
Really?
There was no way that they could actually battle their way out.
Couldn't get out.
Couldn't get out.
And they would be a weight on the food and all that, and the resources.
Yes, yes, because, you know, they had marched in as
The great saviours.
the great saviors, and then the relievers became part of the besieged.
It's never ending.
We have an account by one of the officers of the Madras Fusiliers.
Instead of affording any great relief to this unfortunate garrison of Lucknow, I am writing 1 week after our entrance. We are almost as badly off as the garrison, and with few supplies left, daily fighting, daily loss. But such a scene of filth mixed up with costly things it's impossible to imagine. The finest china used by soldiers of the force. All this mixed up with dead bodies until the stench is so great we can hardly sit, and no one to remove all this filth. Our force is so small, nothing more can really be done. Oh my God.
Conditions were growing
Worse and worse.
worse and worse, and these are events that John O'Brien was definitely a part of and would have seen firsthand.
Yes.
With rebels pounding the Residency with artillery fire, casualties inside were mounting daily. The banqueting hall was turned into a hospital.
As a matter of fact, we know John O'Brien was wounded. If you look at that, it says O'Brien John.
Severe gunshot. Does that say wound?
Yeah, wound.
Yes, left shoulder.
Off left shoulder. And now in those days, without anesthetic, you can imagine what he must have gone
Yes.
through.
My God. Be people dying all around him, there'd be blood everywhere. Must have thought his chances were pretty small of getting out of here. And the hundreds of people in here must have been an extraordinary place.
This place would have seen a lot of suffering. Must have been unimaginable torture for them.
It'd been awful. And lying in the hospital here, unable to do anything. He must have thought his chances were pretty small of getting out of here.
On November 17th, nearly 6 months after the siege first began, a larger relief force came to the rescue. John's ordeal was finally over.
The defense of Lucknow became the pinnacle of the British imperial achievement.
Yeah.
So for John to have been present at this key moment in British imperial history was huge.
Extraordinary, yeah.
If it was an American, you would say he was one of the guys who was present at the Alamo. That is a medal roll, and there he is, Private John O'Brien, 2252.
Top of the list.
And it says, entitled to a clasp for the defense of Lucknow.
Rana has a replica of the medal John O'Brien would have received.
My goodness. That's a lovely thing, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. That's amazing.
It is.
Good on him.
It wasn't just British soldiers like John O'Brien who were decorated for their part in defending Lucknow. Over 700 Indian soldiers remained loyal to the British during the siege.
Every Indian member of the garrison was subsequently admitted to the Order of Merit, which was the highest gallantry award.
Really?
Yeah, it was the Indian equivalent of the Victoria Cross, which they gave them.
Well, that's wonderful. I think he would have been quite proud. And quite delighted to have survived. My God. What a guy. When I think of what his eyes must have seen, war's a disgraceful act. And it must have been terrible for him, having seen the massacre in Kanpur, then coming here and wondering what was happening to his wife and 2 children. But he came through it all and he won a medal. On one hand, it's valorous because you did your job extremely well. But was your job really worth doing? It has to be questioned. But it's very easy for the likes of me to sit here and say that. He lived in a completely different world where we had an empire that had to be looked after, and he was there to keep India British. You know, it's dead easy for me sitting here, Joe the hippie, peace and love and save the whale. But when you're there, it's a different sausage.